clock ticked in eerie silence, each movement echoing in Edward Finch's workshop as though time itself was holding its breath. Edward's hands trembled as he lifted the ancient pocket watch. It was unlike anything he had seen in his lifetime of crafting and repairing clocks, a relic of intricate gears, glowing faintly with a bluish hue, as though alive. The man who had brought it to him, clad in a dark coat and speaking in cryptic riddles, had warned, "This watch doesn't measure time, it commands it. But beware, it comes with a price." Edward dismissed the warning as the ramblings of a madman, consumed by the challenge the artifact posed. But as the gears clicked into place and the watch came alive in his hands, the room around him seemed to ripple. His first experiment, a simple twist of the knob, froze the flickering flame of his workshop's lantern in place. Time had stopped. The flicker of the lantern froze mid-air, its flame a perfect still image against the dim room. Edward's breath caught as he scanned the workshop, realizing that even the faint creaks of the old wooden floor had ceased. Outside, the world was unnervingly quiet, as if every sound had been plucked from existence. His heart raced with both exhilaration and fear. He had done it. He had bent time itself. The weight of such power pressed on him, but curiosity overshadowed caution. With trembling fingers, he twisted the knob again, and the world jolted back to life, the flame swaying as if nothing had happened. A disbelieving laugh escaped him. What possibilities lay ahead? Edward's mind raced. Could he rewind time? Could he relive the moments he had lost? His thoughts immediately turned to Clara, his wife, bedridden for years with an illness that had robbed her of vitality and joy. If this watch could stop time, perhaps it could undo her suffering. His heart pounded with a glimmer of hope. That evening, as the storm outside raged against the small home they shared, Edward sat by Clara's side, clutching the pocket watch. The gears whirred softly as he adjusted the settings, focusing his mind on a memory. Clara's laughter on a sunny spring afternoon, years before the sickness consumed her. The world around him shimmered, colors blending and shifting. When the haze cleared, Clara was standing before him, radiant and full of life. Edward blinked, tears pooling in his eyes. "Edward." "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice as clear and warm as the day he had first fallen in love with her. He could hardly speak, overcome with joy. But beneath his elation lurked an unsettling thought. The man's warning echoed faintly in his mind. It comes with a price. Days turned into weeks, and Clara's recovery felt like a miracle. Edward marveled at her newfound energy as she tended to the garden, laughed at his jokes, and even danced lightly across the creaking wooden floors of their small home. For the first time in years, their home felt alive. But as happiness filled the air, Edward began noticing peculiarities. His workshop, once bustling with the ticking and chiming of clocks, seemed unnaturally silent. The ornate grandfather clock in the corner had stopped entirely, its hands frozen at 3:17, the precise moment he had used the watch to bring Clara back. He dismissed it at first, chalking it up to coincidence, but then other strange events followed. His customers, once regular faces, stopped visiting. The streets of their small town felt emptier. It was as if the world around them was growing quieter, dimmer, less substantial. One evening, as Edward examined the watch under the flickering light of his lantern, he noticed something chilling. The glowing gears inside the watch were tarnished, their once bright hue fading into a dull gray. A faint crack had appeared across its surface, almost like a scar, as though the device was bearing the strain of its unnatural burden. That night, Edward awoke to Clara shaking him, her face pale. "Edward," she whispered, "I had the strangest dream. I was standing in the garden, but everything was frozen. The flowers, the wind, even the birds. They weren't moving. It felt so wrong." Her voice trembled, and Edward held her close, unable to bring himself to confess the truth. But deep down, he knew her dream wasn't just a dream. The watch's manipulation of time was rippling outward, affecting more than just their small household. Desperate for answers, Edward decided to confront the mysterious man who had brought the watch. The journey to the man's last known address was fraught with unease. The farther Edward ventured from home, the more distorted the world seemed. People moved slower, their voices muted as though speaking from a great distance. By the time Edward reached the isolated cottage, he felt as if he were walking through a dream. The man was waiting for him, seated in a shadowy corner, his expression unreadable. "You've used it, haven't you?" the man said without preamble, his tone heavy with regret. Edward nodded, clutching the watch protectively. "I had no choice. It saved my wife." The man sighed deeply. "It always starts that way. You think you can control it, but time is a force that demands balance. What you've taken from it, it will reclaim." He gestured toward the watch, its surface now marred with fractures. "Every use hastens the decay. Soon, it won't just be the watch that breaks. It'll be everything tethered to its influence." Edward's stomach churned. "How do I stop it?" he demanded. The man's expression turned grave. "You can't stop it, but you can end it. Destroy the watch before it collapses entirely. But beware, undoing it may unravel everything it has touched." Edward returned home with the weight of the man's words pressing heavily on his chest. Clara greeted him with her usual warmth, but Edward's heart ached with every glance in her direction. She was alive, vibrant, a vision of the past he had longed for. But at what cost? The cracks in the watch haunted him, their jagged edges seeming to pulse with each tick. Time was running out, and the world around them was unraveling. Shadows clung longer than they should, sounds faded unnaturally, and once bright memories in Edward's mind felt dim and distorted. It was as though reality itself was fraying at the edges. One evening, as the crimson hues of sunset spilled through the windows, Edward sat Clara down and told her everything. Her face shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally, to quiet acceptance. "You risked everything for me," she murmured, tears pooling in her eyes. "But Edward, if what you've said is true, we can't let this continue. No life is worth destroying the world for." Her words pierced him, yet a strange peace settled over him. She was right. The love they shared was eternal, but the life they had borrowed wasn't theirs to keep. That night, Edward took the watch to his workshop for the last time. He placed it on his workbench and studied it under the dim glow of his lantern. It looked frail now, the fractures sprawling like cobwebs across its surface. As his tools hovered over it, doubt clawed at him. Destroying the watch might erase everything it had altered, including Clara's restored health. Could he really bear to lose her again? But the image of the shadowed man's warning burned in his mind. Time would reclaim its due, whether Edward acted or not. He brought his hammer down with trembling hands, shattering the delicate casing of the watch. A deafening silence engulfed the room, followed by an explosive surge of energy. Edward shielded his eyes as light and darkness swirled around him, pulling at the very fabric of the workshop. When the chaos subsided, he found himself slumped against the wall, the watch reduced to a pile of lifeless, twisted metal. The air was still, unnervingly so, as though the world was holding its breath. Edward stumbled out of the workshop, expecting devastation, but instead found a serene calm. The stars overhead shimmered brightly, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. Clara stood in the garden, her figure bathed in moonlight, looking as radiant as ever. She turned to him, her expression soft but tinged with sorrow. "Edward," she said quietly, "I think this is goodbye." Her form began to fade, her edges blurring like a dream slipping from memory. Edward ran to her, but his arms met only empty air. As she disappeared, her voice lingered, a whisper on the wind. "Thank you for everything. I'll always love you." Weeks later, Edward's life returned to a quiet normalcy. The world seemed healed, time flowing naturally once more. Though Clara was gone, her memory remained vivid in his heart. Every night, as he looked up at the stars, he wondered, was she still out there, in some fragment of time untouched by the watch's destruction? And so, Edward's tale ends with a bittersweet truth. Some sacrifices, though painful, restore balance. What would you do if you had the power to rewrite time? Would you risk it all for love, or let destiny take its course? If you found this story captivating, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Horrible Hive for more such tales of mystery and wonder.